you want insider information, you go to dailyfaceoff.com. And this guy, Frank Seravalli. Frank, what's up? How's Florida treating you?
It's hot. I'll tell you what. Just not built for this.
Yeah, I feel you a little bit. The weather much better in Edmonton. But regardless, in that building should be a spicy one tonight as the Oilers get set for Game 5 of the Stanley Cup final. It feels like, again, 3-1 is so vastly different than 3-0. Just being around the team a little bit and being around the series, how much new life did this kind of breathe into the Oilers?
I think a ton. I think when you look at their confidence to get that many pucks by Sergei Bobrovsky, not just in Game 4, but when you overlap to the end of Game 3, huge difference maker for a team that preached this idea of we're getting looks, we're getting opportunities, and we're just not finishing. It turns out that part was true. So they feel like at the same time the pressure is off. They needed to get one win on the board because a sweep is embarrassing. And once they pulled that out, I think the pressure is starting to slowly shift towards the Florida Panthers and will ramp up in a big way if the Oilers can somehow win Game 5.
Yeah, I mean, tonight I've heard Connor Brown say it, Connor McDavid say it. I love it as this sort of like unofficial slogan heading into the game. It's dragging them back to Alberta. Like, again, Game 4, Florida knew they had to go home eventually, whatever. Now, like, there's a little, obviously, Stanley Cup on the line, but like, it's an extra little punch if you win this game and say, get ready, Florida, all the way back up north you go.
Yeah, so if you're to look at it from the Panthers' perspective, you better empty the clip tonight. Like, that's really what you're looking at. And you don't want to fly across the continent again. You don't want to let Lord Stanley slip out of your grasp again. And you certainly don't want to start questioning yourself, your goaltender, the rest of your team, if you're in a choking situation, having a 3-0 lead, and all of a sudden playing in Game 6 where things could be tied 3-3 at the end of it. Like, what we're talking about here is still a long way off. And it sounds funny to say, but not really at the same time. But we're talking about potentially, if this were to happen, even to get to Game 7, we're talking about one of the greatest comebacks in the history of the sport. That's what the Oilers are staring down, the mountain that they need to climb. And that's what the Florida Panthers are sort of trying to push aside as they enter Game 5 with the cup in the building again.
You mentioned Sergei Bobrovsky. Funny enough, he's been in a very similar situation to this already in these playoffs. When you go back to the first round against Tampa, they're up 3-0. Bobrovsky gets shelled in Game 4, allows 6 goals on 32 shots. Maybe not quite as similar because he wasn't yanked in that hockey game, but he followed it up in Game 5 by stopping 31 of 32, and the Panthers finished off that series in 5 games. What are you expecting from Bob tonight? Is this a guy who the Oilers have rattled, or is this a goalie who has shown he's good enough to keep bouncing back?
I first met Sergei Bobrovsky in 2011. He was undrafted. He was in a development camp with the Flyers, and someone said, hey, you better go to this prospect scrimmage that the Flyers are having between themselves and the Washington Capitals. It was a sleepy day in September. No one was really paying attention, but someone said, I bet you that guy is going to be starting games for the Flyers this year, a team that had been searching for a goalie forever. He is the most dedicated, dialed in, focused player that I think I've ever been around. It's almost robotic how focused he is. And I say that in a totally impressive way. Like, that guy is laser focused. And that's probably why a Game 4 of that magnitude hurt so bad. But at the same time, I don't think he's one of those people that spends a lot of time dwelling on it. I bet you the way that game played out, it was probably pretty easy for the Panthers to flush, because you're not really spending much time thinking about what could have been or what might have been. You're just saying, we got trounced, we're moving on. And I think Bobrovsky's probably in the same vein. I think it's way more likely that Bobrovsky bounces back in a huge way than the Oilers putting another 5 or 6 spot on the board and having him be pulled.
Yeah, like I don't think anyone, even the most optimistic of Oilers fans, is going to sit there and say, "Hey, go beat them 6-2 tonight" or something crazy. I think everyone recognizes that this is going to be a much tighter hockey game. So on that note, what do you need to see from the Oilers in this game to maybe counteract the fact that Bobrovsky and the entire Panthers team will likely be much better?
It's really not difficult to chart a path, right, for the Oilers. Let's just start with the power play. 1 for 16 in this series. One power play game could get this series closer to level ground. Just that alone. To say nothing of getting Leon Draisaitl going, getting Zach Hyman, the playoff leading goal scorer, by a 40% margin, getting him going. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has still been really quiet. And, oh, by the way, Evander Kane, is he playing? Is he not? That question sort of lingers. I think the Oilers had clamped down on Chris Knobloch and the information that he's sharing. Those things, like any one of those things in a vacuum, might be enough to win you one game because that's all you're talking about.
The margins are going to be razor thin tonight. So Leon Draisaitl popping off and firing one home from his office, that could be the difference. Stuart Skinner having a really solid performance, that could end up being the difference. So tonight's going to be a fascinating one.
The Ryan Lomberg in tonight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there going to be any other adjustments by Florida, do you think?
I think that's the main one.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get to a little bit more of that later in the show too. And I mean, Edmonton did a decent job. You look at some of the Panthers who had bad games, like they got to Forsling and Ekblad a little bit last game, which is something they really failed to do earlier on in the series. Frank, you have a new top 75 free agents list up now at dailyfaceoff.com. I wanted to get into that really quickly with you, mix in a little bit of offseason talk. Jake Guentzel, should Oilers fans maybe start to think about getting more familiar with him? He could be coming in division or what?
Yeah, I could see it for sure. I think the Vancouver Canucks are going to make a really strong push if Guentzel makes it to market to try and bring him in. It makes so much sense on so many levels. For one, there's a clear need. Think back to their playoff run, and the conversation feels like forever ago, a lifetime ago, but just Elias Pettersson really not having the proper line mates to be successful. And I think there's plenty of blame that's due to him in particular, self-inflicted, but it's not lost on anyone that he didn't really have a ton of help. So throw Guentzel on his wing, and that could go a long way towards solving for that problem. The other thing is there's just a familiarity that's built in. He played for Rick Tocchet as an assistant in Pittsburgh. He played under Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin. He knows their strength and conditioning coaches. That makes a ton of sense. They can also try and find a way to make the money work. I think they're probably kind of capped out at 7 years times 9.5. They definitely can't stretch to 10, but I think they're going to be squarely in the mix, if not the front runner, to get Jake Guentzel whenever free agency opens 12 noon at July 1st on Canada Day. They're ready to roll, and they want to try and be aggressive to improve their team.
Yeah, I mean, them taking a step forward and adding a high-end piece like that is certainly something to keep on the radar from an Oilers perspective.
No doubt.
From an Oilers perspective now, like when I go through this top 10, it's kind of like, if you squint, maybe you see like a Matt Roy as a fit if they were to get rid of Cody Ceci and dump him off, but not really. It goes to the next page, though, and there's a name that a bunch of Oilers fans, he jumps off the page to them, and it's Jake DeBrusk, a local product. Is he going to hit market?
I believe he is. Yeah, I think he had been trying to get out of Boston for a while. Part of that, I think, was with Bruce Cassidy. I think it'd been much better under Jim Montgomery. Now moving forward, I look at it and he's a pretty consistent 20-goal scorer. He had 19 this year in 80 games, has gotten to 27 before. And he's someone that just adds a little bit of a different element for your team. So I think there's potentially a home in Alberta. I don't know if the Oilers would be the front runner. Wonder about the Calgary Flames, because they talked openly. Craig Conroy back in March with me at the general managers meeting said, I'm going to be active in free agency. And if you're thinking a midterm deal, 3 years, 4 years, whatever it might be to help tide the Flames over, DeBrusk makes a ton of sense as someone that can come in and help supplement their scoring. So I could see that for sure. I could see the Oilers kind of dabbling as they continue to try and, strengthen their team on the wings, but he's going to certainly be a player that's in demand.
We've seen it before. We've seen it work well and also not work well, say for Connor Brown this season. But we've seen players look at Edmonton as I'm coming off a tough year. I'm coming off some injuries. Maybe that's the spot where I try to rebuild my value and ride shotgun next to McDavid and Draisaitl. Today on DFO Live, and I highly recommend everyone go listen to the full segment over on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. You kind of just sprinkled it out there. Victor Arvidsson. Is he maybe, he was a pain in the ass to play against in the playoffs the last number of years, but is he maybe a guy who could look at Edmonton and go rebuild my value in the top 6, coming off some injuries, take a 1-year deal kind of thing?
Yeah, I think he's going to have more opportunity than that, but I think the Oilers have certainly kept him on their radar. I think Arvidsson is a guy that he makes so much sense from a compete perspective. You mentioned pain in the arse to play against. He's someone that has, whatever the game situation is, whether it's high skill, speed, although he's not a burner, but just if it's a physical, tough game, he's all good no matter what way you want to play. And he's also a guy that has been a really consistent producer. He missed a ton of games last year. He's been dealing with those injuries that have really, crippled him in terms of his games played. And he's someone that I think is going to be a sneaky good addition for someone that the Oilers are certainly going to be keeping tabs on.
He's going to have a busy summer negotiating a new contract, the Olympics with the dive in. It's going to be a busy boy.
You had to slide that in, eh?
Like 3-meter diving board, 10-meter platform.
He can do it all, whatever he wants.
Frank, we're so caught up in like our little bubble here in Edmonton with the Stanley Cup final, like games still being played on June 18th. It is very easy to forget. We are 10 days away from the NHL draft. We are 13 days away from NHL free agency.
We are 12 days away from Ken Holland's contract expiring. I mean, there's no shortage of things going on that the Oilers are obviously focused on the Stanley Cup final, but the people in their front office are also knee deep in everything else that's happening, trying to stay on top of things, because you can't just be doing one thing at one time. Your roster has already been set. The team isn't changing. You've done all your work required as a front office to position this current team. You got to move on to the next one and just enjoy the highs and lows of whatever happens on the ice now.
Yeah, the Oilers, again, 13 days from now, they might have a new GM. Like, it's crazy.
People were critical of what I mentioned on the show, that they've already begun initial discussions with Leon Draisaitl, and they're like, can you imagine doing that during the Stanley Cup final? It's like, yeah, guys, that's how business works. You can't sit still. It's not like you just wake up on July 1 and you're all of a sudden like, hey, we're announcing a contract, or we'd like to start negotiations now. It's not a 5-minute conversation or phone call. I believe they met last time we were in Florida for games 1 and 2. And just had that initial dialogue to get rolling. It doesn't mean that Leon Draisaitl is not focused. That's why you have an agent and you pay him 3.5% of your contract, so that they can engage in conversations like this for you and you can focus on playing.
Yeah, tremendous insight as always, Frank. Appreciate your time here. Stay cool. Enjoy the hockey game tonight. And we might be chatting with you again tomorrow, because there is a chance you're going to be in the air coming back to Edmonton.
I'm either it's a strange life this time of year. I have 2 flights booked, one heading home, one heading to Edmonton. So we'll see which one I'm checking in for in about 10 hours time.
Frank, and I hope you believe this in your bones, but when we win game 5, it only means there's going to be a game 7.
Oh, I've said that all along. I said that's why the Panthers need to empty the clip, because if they lose game 5 tonight, we are definitely getting a game 7. And by the way, you might as well just declare Friday a holiday in Edmonton, because ain't nobody coming to work that day.
I got a fucking MC a wedding on Saturday. This is just driving me crazy, but I'm going to juggle it all. But yes, it's a holiday.
Because it's the Cup. Frank, appreciate your time. Enjoy the game.
See you guys.
What's up, Nation citizens? If you like that video, then you need to be subscribed to the Oilers Nation YouTube. Podcasts, live shows, exclusive interviews, and analysis. Everything you need from your favorite voices at Oilers Nation. And you don't want to miss any of it, so hammer that subscribe button.